Today we're talking to Joe Goulcher, Creative Director, who's worked with some incredible brands like Xbox, Boiler Room and Samsung. While his day-to-day is PR and social, he's also an amazing follow on LinkedIn, where he gives his no-holds-barred thoughts on the creative industry. He's been particularly vocal about AI and how it is used in creative work, so we'll no doubt talk a lot about that today. We're also incredibly honoured to be the very first podcast he's appeared on. Welcome to the show, Joe. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for popping my podcast cherry. Am I allowed to say that, the first sentence of the podcast?
It's a great first sentence.
It's a spectacular first sentence on a podcast. We're delighted with that.
Steve obviously gave you a bit of a mini intro, but for the benefit of listeners who might not be aware of you, could you give us a little overview about yourself and your career so far?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm from Bradford originally, so up in West Yorkshire. I started out being a teaching assistant in a Bradford primary school and quickly realised that I wanted to get the hell out of there and move down into media and marketing land in London. So that's what I did. I ended up getting an internship at Global Radio, which was fantastic. And, I quickly learned the ropes of what PR even was at that time and how it was activated and all the channels that they were using. But yeah, it was amazing. I got to work on some huge events like Summertime Ball and didn't really have a clue what I was doing. But luckily, the lady there who was managing me, her husband worked at M&C Saatchi Sport and Entertainment and put me in front of them. And I immediately clicked with a chap called David Roberts, who I'm forever grateful for, about 15 years ago now, for giving me my first kind of proper job in the industry. So that was where I started and cut my teeth, was in essentially PR and kind of sponsorship and those sorts of activations. So very quickly I was working on things like the warehouse project with Reebok, but also things like EE and the BAFTAs and Jameson with their film strategy and that sort of thing. So it was hit the ground running, didn't really know what I was doing, but some things were clicking for me, and social ended up being the main one that did. And I think at that time, no one really else in the agency knew what social was. It was literally that long ago, and no one was certainly not hired in order to run it properly or efficiently. So that's where I started sort of cutting my teeth in PR, comms, and social. And then I'm kind of meandered through the industry for a long time. Lots of full-time, lots of freelance. Dabbled in the kind of entertainment space with agencies like DDA. So lots of film and Premiere as well, Premiere PR. And I've been in-house at EE just after M&C Saatchi, actually, from client to client side. Again, working on the BAFTAs and Glastonbury and Wembley sponsorships and kind of running social with the team there. And then, a heck of a lot of other stuff as well in between. I mean, some of my favorites in terms of kind of more freelance capacity stuff, as like you said at the beginning, Boiler Room was brilliant. I've done a lot of work with PlayStation and was also the global creative social director at an agency of record for Xbox for a good two plus years.
I think you've named every big brand that I could probably think of.
You have an amazing CV.
That's incredible.
Yeah, my CV it's a wreck. Once you start putting logos on that document, it's unreadable. So I'll keep it brief today, but feel free to reach out if you need any more information.
Very impressive. What a career so far.
We are big fans of your work. We've seen some of the stuff you've done on social. You first came to my attention via your hit mushroom tweet.
The mushroom tweet, yeah.
The mushroom tweet, which was extraordinarily funny. And it really, really, I mean, not just me, obviously, hundreds of thousands of people, but it really got me. And I read it quite a lot and showed it to people. But I kind of want to delve straight in and sort of get your thoughts on AI in the creative industry, because you've done all this brilliant creative work and now AI has come along and it poses some interesting questions which you have been talking about quite openly on LinkedIn. So tell us a little bit about your views on it, the positives, the negatives, how you're using it, how you're not using it. We're really interested to pick your brains on that.
So I think the first thing that we need to do before we have any sort of discussion on it is actually define what we mean by AI. And like from my point of view, and unfortunately not the rest of the industry's point of view, AI, meaning artificial intelligence, is something that we are clearly decades away from in terms of what that actually means. What we're actually seeing is large language models, and the models are then being created and used to generate images based on or video content based on existing content, right? So that to me isn't artificial intelligence. That will never be artificial intelligence. That is essentially a glorified plagiarism machine that is very useful and very exciting, and you can see it being used for fantastic, exciting reasons. But it's pretty dodgy in so many ways, and I'll get onto that in a sec. But in terms of the positives and negatives of let's stick with AI for the duration of this conversation because it's easier. There are positives that we all know that, and I think it's very easy to look at something like the NHS or ancient archaeology, or being able to track down the body of a mountaineer that's been missing for 10 years using artificial intelligence or large language or whatever it might be. That's good, and that is obviously a good thing. Spotting cancer cells earlier would obviously be a very good thing. There will always be bads. That's the problem, and whether that's from a completely hallucinated answer to a question on ChatGPT, or even worryingly so today, Grok on Twitter is telling people that the famine in Gaza, that the images that are coming out of that and the videos that are coming out of that are actually not in Gaza, and they're 7 years old and they're from the Yemen, which is incorrect. These are the tools that people are using, not just in our industry, but teenagers and kids and everyone and grandmas and everyone in between, to verify information and to verify messages that are coming from around the world. And as soon as that gets into the hands of nefarious parties, I don't have to tell you how terrifying and damaging that is, right? When you apply that to our industry, where do you start? I think there's conversations here around that one of the ones I hear a lot is come on, get with the times, catch up, or be left behind. You guys were the same when Photoshop came out, and you said the same stuff about designers having their jobs taken away from them. For me personally, that's a false equivalence. That's a fallacy. The nature of things like Photoshop and any other tools that you use on a computer to edit or to create with is very, very different from a tool that scours usually an illegal database of information, images, video content, and then recreates something from that. They're two very, very different processes. I try my best to avoid it at all costs in agency land. I think, when you've got a team of people around you that are genuinely some of the most talented, hands-on designers and art directors that you've ever worked with. I did some work at Territory recently and worked with some amazing artists there, Territory Studios, who worked with Disney and Apple and lots of other, Amazon Prime, working on film posters and graphics and key art for amazing TV shows. When you see the craft and the ability that these people have, and the years and years of discipline and learning and understanding of different mediums, of which will be a computer, absolutely. It strikes me as a very bizarre thing to then say, actually, let's take all your toys away and just use this big shiny new thing to create a uncanny video for a pitch document or something like that, right? And the more I work with, the bigger clients of the world, the Apples and the Disneys and that sort of thing, the more I am seeing them asking to absolutely not use generative AI in any capacity, even through the pitch process, never mind the end results of the actual content itself. So, sorry, that was a very long answer, but I feel like there's a lot of context that you have to have before you reach that point to underpin it with any sort of gravitas or ethics.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a big question as well, so it deserves a big answer. That's interesting what you said about people stipulating we don't want any generative AI included. So is that because they don't feel it's accurate? Is that because they want, what's the reasoning behind that, do you think?
There's a multitude of reasons. I think it firstly depends on what vertical or kind of what industry you're in, right? So, for gaming and for TV and film and especially music as well, generative AI is still very, very controversial. And we all know the reasons why that, from a rights perspective and from IPs, to the extent where you're seeing Disney now take people to court and spend hundreds of millions of pounds to take people to court to get their rights back, right? So, but that also is there from a consumer perspective. And what you see, or what lots of brands see, as soon as they start dabbling in that kind of territory, things like Call of Duty, for example, did it last year with some generative artwork and in-game assets, the pushback from a community and people that aren't that literate in our world of industry, right? The actual consumers are pushing back so hard that they disgusted by a lot of this work, right? They're taking the things that they love about games, TV, and film, the artistry, the talent, the craft, and the voice acting, or the physical rendering that goes into a beautiful piece of work, right? And using it, circumnavigating all that talent, taking out the people out of that process, and just producing what I would say is slop in a lot of ways, right? So that to me is a real kind of golden nugget from or at least a brand perspective of like, actually, yeah, we don't want to touch AI or generative AI in some regards because people fucking hate it. Are we allowed to swear? Sorry.
You absolutely.
Are. Absolutely.
Hate that stuff. But then, the other side of that is that you do get a lot of, Netflix, for example, are going hard into AI, and the production of a lot of their shows, or even, Apple, I'm sure, with some of their sci-fi shows and that kind of thing, they're using it for very specific reasons to speed up processes. They'll probably be using 99% of the time will be using their own owned assets. So again, that's very different from saying, we're going to bash something into a chatbot and see what comes out and then use that as our marketing material, which you'd be surprised how often I see in our industry, right? But you can't do that when you're Disney. You can't. The other example recently was, it's less about AI, but Bungie, the video game developer, have a huge new game coming out called Marathon, and they're the guys behind Destiny, which is a 10-year-old massively multiplayer online game, hugely successful, very, very big fan base. And they went out with a new game fairly recently called Marathon, where, as it happened, some of the assets that they'd used in the game had not been signed off by the artist that had made them. So it'd just been scoured and taken and in a bunch of assets from an art website somewhere and chucked into the machine that was creating these assets for them internally. And the furor that came out of that, again, from a community perspective and from a legal perspective, and the transparency that had to then be applied to that was devastating to the game, to the extent where this huge game with a huge amount of investment has now been indefinitely pushed back. Like no one knows what's happening with it anymore because it's been such a shit show in terms of the clarity and ethics of where those assets have come from. So this is the playground in which these brands are in at the moment, and to go all in on what I would consider, Google's and the Apple's. There's two other examples, right? Apple released their AI stuff last year that was so bad that they had to recall it. And internally, they said it was one of the most embarrassing and ugly things that the brand has ever done. Google, no one's using it on their phones. Very, very few people using it on their phones. Samsung, probably fairly similar. The reasons are because they've gone out with such bizarre functionality that no one wants or needs to generate an image of a unicorn wearing a top hat and show it with your friend. It's like, no, that's not what we need. We need diary management, and we need stuff to do my expenses and, ordering food and a taxi at the same time. That's the next wave of this sort of AI tool stuff that is starting to be actually quite exciting. And it's not basing it on stolen assets for a start as well. So that's the consumer landscape, and there's a big old, what I would consider, sunk cost fallacy that has gone into a lot of this with from all the way from Sony, PlayStation to Xbox to Google. I've got a Google phone and to iPhone to everything else, where there's been billions and probably over trillions now poured into this AI thing, and no one's really known how to talk to people about it or what people want it for, but it's still being kind of foie gras down everyone's throat.
That's such a good way of putting it.
And people are starting to feel that from an industry perspective as well, from what I can tell. And of course there are going to be, AI is fantastic for management, for process, for generating something from your own assets that you've built. I love that, and that's great. And I think we should be able to do more of that with regulation. What I don't like seeing is AI being forced down people's throats, especially when they've spent 20, 30 years perfecting their craft as the best in the industry, what they do.
That makes perfect sense, and that it's a beautiful way of putting it. Foie gras down their throats. I think that's a phrase that I'm going to take away. But and you talked about the kind of there are positives, the practical uses of AI. I'm using it a lot to sort of help organise my life. Some mad examples that I got from like a conference where it's like this woman was like, "Oh, you can just take photos of all of your manuals for like white goods, washing machines, all this, so you don't have that like big folder of instruction manuals, and then you can just ask it questions based on, like if you've got faults." That's lovely.
The answers to those questions might not be right. That's the
true.
thing. If you're feeding in like instructions to your washing machine or whatever fit, that there is a chance, as we've seen today with the Blueberry GTP stuff on the newest, like, and I'm sure people will know about that from without me even saying anything more, but like, it might hallucinate. It might tell you to set your washing machine on fire and put it in the garden. Like, there's still, sorry to interject, but like, there's still a barrier there, even for the basics, that we still haven't really sorted out yet. If you can't read how many B's are in the word blueberry, I'm not going to trust it with my whites and reds.
No, I'm 100% with you on that. And then I'm thinking to myself, like, even without AI, I'd probably find a way just with the manual to set fire to my washing machine or just dismantle the whole thing. But I was going to ask, you've been quite clear on your sort of stance on how you use it as a creative director. Is there any kind of uses of it that in the creative world that you think are justified, are kind of brilliant? Because it's improving quite a lot, and there's a lot that can be done with it. But yeah, like, what's your view on that?
Yes, and there always will be. There always will be with any medium of any sort of pseudo artistry. I think, you know, I see the odd account on things like Instagram and TikTok where it's using AI generated content in a really weird, abstract, kind of terrifying way, where it's been so heavily curated that it's turned into something new and it's exciting and different and cut through and disruptive and all the other buzzwords, right? But that's just art. That isn't our industry, and that is a clearly different type of usage. I think what we have to remember about all generative tools like this is it is literally an average. Whether you're asking it a question about politics or what color an orange is, it will give you the average answer back. So, you know, there may be a world where you're using it to creatively brainstorm for ideas that you actively don't want to use because it's the average. Like, I know that's a cynical way of looking at it, but genuinely, you put in something like, give me a campaign for a challenger bank in England and come up with 10 social media ideas, it will give you 10 social media ideas that are already out there, that have been done before. So yeah, there is part of the process there where, yeah, I would use AI to figure out what not to do. But then, you know, I do think we're now in this, you know, I mentioned up front about putting the genie back in the bottle and being left behind and all those sorts of bits of language that I find a little bit combative and a little bit bizarre, actually. It's kind of shitting on artists is the overriding feeling there, and standing on the shoulders of other people and cutting out the humans, which I have a problem with. But yeah, I mean, there are always going to be ways that it's used effectively and interestingly. I think Territory Studios are a fantastic example of that, where they literally do have the best CG workers designers in the whole world. They work on things like Dune and the Batman and just most incredible stuff you'll see on film and TV. That's half of the business. I worked in the creative advertising bit, but those guys are exceptional at what they do, right? And they are finding ways to ingrain AI and generative tools into that process. Again, probably 99% of the time from owned assets. And I think that really is the differentiator for me. I don't want to go into a pitch room with some of the biggest brands in the world with a deck that looks like it's just a smushed together image of loads of uncanny stuff. I want something to be handcrafted and bespoke, and they're paying us a heck of a lot of money to get there in the first place, especially if they're paying you for a pitch. Like if I was a brand manager or a CEO and you came in with generative AI in a pitch deck, I'd probably go fucking nuts. So I think that's the differentiator. There are going to be processes where it is helpful. I understand that. And I think, even, we were mentioning it just before we started recording, but, that there's really interesting ways to use generative tools to control where your media spend is going, for example, or tweaking an image to wear a different color hat in a different territory or whatever it might be, and surfacing that in the right way. And then suddenly, not only have you cut out the designers, you're probably cutting out the media spend lads as well. So a little bit controversial there too, but there are going to be ways that this is happening around us that we don't really have much control over because it's cutting costs so much. But I don't hate AI and or generative tools. I think I hate more the people around it and the ways that it is used nefariously, right? I think it is just another tool, and I think the more that we apply any sort of anthropomorphism to it and say that it's got agency, which is why I have a problem with artificial intelligence. It's not. It's a glorified calculator that you're putting stuff into, and I think the more we give it credence of like, oh, you have to say thank you to it, or which you see people like Sam Altman riding along with and creating this, oh, it's out of the bottle now. It's not out of the bottle. I could pour a bottle of Diet Pepsi into the server hold. It would be dead in an afternoon. Like, we haven't even
You thought about this, Joe.
Right? Yeah, I've got a plan. But and then we haven't even talked about the environmental implications of this, right? Which are staggering. Absolutely, by no exaggeration. We know that the server farms that Google's and Elon are using are now destined to take up as much electricity and as much power as places like all of fucking New Zealand. Like, that's insane. And it's for what? What is it for? So, yes, there are going to be ways to use it. Yes, I'm excited to find those ways to use it. I think we need to do it ethically. I think we need to do it consciously when we think about the environment. And I think we need to do it with regard for craft and regard for people. And we can find ways to dovetail that process into existing frameworks and new processes or existing processes. But to see it absolutely destroy the industry, which it really is at the moment, there are so many people that I talk to on a daily basis who I would consider the best in the industry, what they do, from music video directors to designers to artists to copywriters, that are losing their jobs. They are literally losing their jobs. They're losing their livelihoods, and they're losing time and money that they'll never, ever get back. And again, I don't think it's the same as when Photoshop came in. And actually, what I am beginning to sense, not just in our industry, but outside of our industry and from a consumer perspective as well, the stuff I talked about earlier, there will be a swing back. This bubble will burst. Trust me on that. And it won't be pretty. And there will still be AI, and it'll be here forever. Don't get me wrong. And it's not going to be as disastrous as something like NFTs or kind of crypto bubble bursts and that sort of stuff. But I think from a cultural and aesthetic and kind of work, like craft perspective, it will swing back, because people want that back. People want to see real people. They want to see fingerprints on stop motion. They want to see the mistakes in video games. They want to see the bloopers behind the TV show or the extra stuff that you get at the end of an Avengers film, right? We don't want automated slop all of our lives. No one wants that, and there will be a swing back. And we need to find a way for those two worlds to work together, not just from an agency perspective, but it is out in the world now. It's everywhere. So it's a big challenge ahead of us.
There's an interesting example. It's such a small example of this, but there was a video of some bunnies on a trampoline, and it was very convincing, and a lot of people thought these bunnies were real. And then people very quickly eventually realized, or someone said, actually, it's not, look at this bunny, it disappears, and all this kind of stuff. And off the back of this TikToker made this really amazing song, kind of singing about it, which everyone loved. And then people have been riffing off his song. And it's just like, it's a lovely example of where some robot made a thing that didn't really, or just disappointed people, basically, because they're like, oh, it's not real. But off the back of that, some actual human art came off it. From that piece came another bit of human art. I was like, oh, that's actually really lovely to see. It will grow. It survives there, even despite this stuff.
It's great. That's lovely. And I think there are always going to be opportunities like that. But, it's the same as like punk coming out of the Thatcher era.
Yeah.
Or like,
yeah.
It's like,
yeah, I know. It would be better if we didn't.
Come out of bad things, right? And that's always going to be the case. My first gut reaction to something like that is that's actually quite terrifying, that we now, those discrepancies that you described of like, oh, look at that rabbit, it wasn't quite right. They will be gone in 3 to 6 months. That won't be a way for us to tell what is disinformation anymore. It won't ever be perfect, I don't think. And there's maybe some kind of uncanny stuff still going on. But we're getting to a point now where, I even saw today there was a fake video on X. I'm back on X at the moment, don't ask why. That was a Palestinian kid smiling in a video where it was a famine video. It was a horrific scene, and there was a kid smiling in it. I don't know whether that's real now, and I'm an expert in this industry, right? I don't know what's real anymore. How is everyone else going to tell? Whether it's working in-house at agencies or in brands or the wider news cycle. And what we're seeing is that ramp to extremism and all you have to do is log into Twitter with a burner account or X with a burner account and not follow anyone, and already you're being served white supremacist, terrifying stuff immediately. And so that ramp and that entry point for especially younger people, whether it's the manosphere or misinformation about Gaza or Jews or whatever it might be, it's all happening in real time. And all I can apply over conversations about fun rabbits or kittens doing the Olympic sports, which I saw the other day, is like, shit, well, if I can't tell this is real, how are kids that are 16 that are now going to be able to vote next year going to be able to differentiate between dangerous disinformation from people like Tommy Robinson or something like that, right? So yeah, it is fun until it's not fun, and I think I've seen the not fun from the outset because we've all seen how this goes before. Yeah, sorry to be a bit of a downer on it, but there's this guy on Instagram I see quite a lot who just goes around showing quite elderly people in the States like printouts of weird CG memes that he's made. It's completely bizarre, and he just points to them and they're like, okay, what's that about? And it's really interesting because what the video he showed them the other day was like the AI video of kittens on the Olympics and jumping off the diving boards and stuff like that. And these elderly women in the grocery stores and in supermarkets were just like, how did they get the kittens to do that? This is absolutely incredible. And these people are voting, or they are buying from brands that we're running, or they are joining in the social media conversations. So the literacy for me is not there from a community perspective or even from an internal industry perspective to deal with the pace that AI and generative AI is happening around us.
Yeah, I feel that 100%. It's what we do. It's kind of like, let's get something out there and then we'll worry about it afterwards. And there's so much to worry about. There's so much that's concerning. But I am quite keen to talk to you about more of the fun stuff and away from AI, because what I'm really interested to know, Joe, is like what's kind of exciting you creatively right now. We've talked about some of the negative parts of AI, but just generally in the world or with brands or in the industry or however you want to interpret it, you're an expert in this field. Like what's really getting you going creatively at the moment?
The kickback that I mentioned and the swing that I mentioned back to craft is happening before our eyes. And I think that's really genuinely exciting. It's almost like the industry had to go this far to find our way back to the ads of the 80s, right? Or the excitement of PR again. And finding the real in what we're in now is exciting from a consumer perspective and from a creative perspective. So I look to people like Uncommon that are out there creating some of the best work in the world that takes a long time for them to make, and they'll push back on clients, or they'll only work with people that really want to work with them, and they'll destroy processes in the process to get to that point. But what you end up with is the best work in the world. And you see, I think it was their ITV ad that Nils and the team did with Uncommon recently, where it was almost a stop motion, frame by frame makeup and different outfit changes. And they didn't have to say it, but it was a direct kickback to AI and CG as well in some regards. And it was showing the craft and showing the care and showing the dedication of something like ITV, which is obviously famed for its drama and for its creativity, as is Channel 4 and BBC. So that excites me. And then speaking of Channel 4, I do see, Matt and the team there have done some amazing work over the last 5 or 10 years of kind of pivoting, especially the last 5 years of pivoting their social output and actually their programming to YouTube. And the success that they've had with creating a sort of walled garden of content on there that is still broadcast level stuff, but also has other stuff on there has been really groundbreaking. So I'd urge everyone to check out how, there's lots of work out there about how they've done that and the reasons that they've done that. We know now, for example, that more people watch the YouTube app streamed to their television than on their handsets. And as we know, Gen Z and below, and probably lots of millennials as well, watch more YouTube and streaming than anything else at the moment. So for Channel 4 to be like, yeah, we get that, actually. No one's watching telly anymore. Let's whack everything on YouTube and let's make it an ecosystem that works for that platform really effectively. That really excites me because it just means that the kind of dynamic, smart, creative people are getting to the top of these businesses now and are making informed decisions about putting their consumers and audience first. And really, every single client and every brief that I work on, I do try and drill home at every point that we're not box ticking. We're not just answering an internal brief. We're answering to our audience. There is a side of AI where artistry is becoming exciting, and I think when you do see those bizarre kind of abstract accounts, or you do look at the territories and the way that they're using AI generated or AI within that process. That genuinely does excite me. I am a nerd. I am a sci-fi geek. I've grown up on film and TV and gaming has always been, since I was about 3 years old, the thing in my life, right? And I think when you start when you start seeing some of those processes erode and change over the years, it is scary. The same way that CG was scary when it came in the 90s or the 80s, and it was like, oh fuck, what's going on here? What's going to happen to all our artists? But it is exciting, and that there are going to be things that we've never seen before. But I just hope that doesn't dilute the work and what's possible out there.
We mentioned at the start about all these amazing brands that you've worked with and different freelance gigs that you've done. So you have a lot of experience in PR and social. From that, is there anything that you wish more people understood about those disciplines?
So, yeah, it's controversial because I work at a lot of social agencies, right? And I work with a lot of social people, and it's been my bag for a long time, as has PR. There are so many learnings and crossovers with those two worlds. And what I'm starting to see more of is the bigger agencies and agency groups being able to do social a little bit slowly but surely more effectively. They're not going to be as boutique or as succinct as something like a Fabric or a Boomerang or a Cooler, where that they're clearly the best in the game at what we do. But they are learning the tricks of the trade, and they're hiring social people to be part of those PR teams. So who knows where that's going to go, right? It could be that all social agencies disappear in the next 5 years, or it could be that there's going to be dozens more. It could go either way. Who knows? But I do think there's something exciting in that. And I think social is obviously just another channel. It's the same as an outdoor, or it's the same really as a digital ad or a newspaper ad or whatever it might be. It's just a different platform, and you have to use different ways of communicating, different ways of getting people's attention. What is slightly different is, social content. We're now looking at ways at how that is served up directly in people's algorithms, on people's front pages and For You pages. It used to be very much more of a metric, vanity metric kind of system, where it was all about followers. It was all about engagement as much as possible, which is still important, but it was never really about shareability or getting it pushed to the front page. And so a lot of the time, and this is the big kind of crossover with PR that I see now, is that this content, whatever it is, whether it's a campaign or a single kind of one-off execution or whatever, it needs that PR moment. It needs that hook in it at the beginning or at the end or whatever it might be to make it sticky and to make it shareable. Like even this week, we've seen Instagram use the new kind of retweet function almost, where you'll press it and it will go to a separate page of your profile and it will store it there, almost like a Threads profile or a tweet stream, right? Which means to me, again, every client that we should be talking to at the moment from a social and PR perspective is that it needs to be shareable. Otherwise, it's never going to get into the front pages. It's never going to be on that kind of retweet system. So it's now all merging together. And I think the more you look at, say, the functionality of X, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, really, I mean, if you didn't work in social media and you weren't on it every day, I don't know if you'd be able to tell the difference anymore. They're all doing exactly the same thing, exactly the same functionality, and getting content to people in the same ways. Now, where that becomes problematic, and it's sort of related to stuff I was talking about earlier, is that we know algorithms thrive off things like hate or shock or funny or whatever it might be. They pull those emotional levers the same way that we do in PR or in comms or above the line or whatever it is. But that becomes concerning, because then, like I said earlier, you join up on X and suddenly all you've got is a hate stream of stuff that would probably be illegal 5 years ago. So that's where it becomes different from PR for me. This is a very different world. I wouldn't necessarily say it's still a social world in social media, but I don't think we operate in the same ways that we used to in terms of keeping up with friends as much, or family, or posting news as much as we used to. I think it is more now just about content and about digesting content from around the world, whether it's viral or streaming or the kind of latest hate speech that's happening, right? So that is a very, very different beast to PR, and it's not one that's fueled by GB News or anything else. It's its own thing. PR to me, you can be clearer, you can be simpler, you can be maybe more controlled with that message. You can write a press release, or you can design a an outdoor poster. And yeah, that might be shared on social, and that's a great thing to happen to lots of brands that share these kind of viral out of home, the Monzo partnerships with the cereal brand and that kind of thing. All very exciting, but they're still kind of designed to be talked about in social. So sorry, that is not a very succinct answer, but I think what I'm trying to say is those worlds dovetail so much, but they still very much have their own kind of independent functionalities and risks associated with them, right? So that was a bit around the houses.
No, it makes sense. And I wanted to stick with social, but we've talked more broadly about the industry, but wanted to come back to you specifically, Joe, because you're you said you're back on X as well, but you're a very engaging, interesting and funny follow on LinkedIn. You create and write a lot of great content. Right. How important is LinkedIn to you for well, we've used the phrase, or we're going to use the phrase, your personal brand? Because LinkedIn has had a bit of I hated it a few years ago, I'm not going to lie, because it seemed like a load of nonsense where people were like, oh, I did this at the weekend, and it made me think about 4 lessons in business and, like really grim stuff.
B2B management, yeah.
Yeah, but now it seems like a more interesting place because I think of what's happened on other social channels, which have become less social. It used to be everyone was hanging out on Twitter and X and engaging. So very long-winded way of asking the question, how important is LinkedIn to you?
I mean, social's always been important to me, especially from a work perspective. You'd be amazed at the amount of jobs that I got offered from places like even on Twitter back in the day, right? It's having a big network on these places is really helpful, and connecting with the right people is really helpful. I think I personally use LinkedIn as a stopgap for Twitter. I think there's a risk of going on somewhere like LinkedIn and feeling a little bit like you're at school or that everyone's from your workplace is watching, which in some cases they are. And I think if you are confident enough to be, or maybe privileged enough to be your everyday self in your workplace, which I usually am, and I'm very vocal about most things without being a twat, but I try to be as vocal as possible about things that I care about. So there's no surprises when I go on LinkedIn and say, oh God, look at the state of this. And it's never a punch down thing. I really do. I mean, there are a few things, but I do try to avoid the whole, murdering people's work online, unless it's really horrible and it's, like a campaign for the military in Fortnite or something like that. That's when I can kind of get my back up. But in terms of kind of curating a personal brand, I just ignore it. I genuinely do, and I'm staggered at the amount of people that are willing to pay money to create some sort of personal brand or teach people how to do it. To me, it is a very, very simple process of emulating my personality to an online persona or avatar, right? It always has been. And I think for our generation of people, that generation of born in the internet and then born into social media, we find it actually very easy to emulate ourselves into a virtual world, whether that's a social media network or a video game or whatever. I've always had the capacity to do that and do it effectively through writing and communication. And that's what I've practiced my trade in for so long as well. So maybe it comes to me a little bit easier, and I'm able to have a self-awareness, I think, and maybe a bit of a critical lens on myself, as well as everything else that's going on out there. Because I think if I just went on there and was like, your work sucks and I'm awesome, that wouldn't fly, and it would make me feel horrible and it would be rubbish, right? So I think as long as you keep a kind of balanced head about this stuff and you still have an air of humility, which I do try to, surprisingly enough, then I think it's kind of what you want to make it. And if anyone wants to pull you aside at your workplace and say, I wish you could be a little less on LinkedIn and a little smaller in yourself, then I would tell them to fuck off. I think that is a bit of a red line, and it's something I've learned from working on myself for a long time from a mental health perspective or in relationships or whatever, is don't tell people to be smaller, tell them to be bigger, take up space, especially for people that might be marginalized, that haven't had voices before. And I think that's an important platform to do it on. And also, I get offered a lot of work on there, so that's sick.
Yeah, it's got another added benefit. You kind of mentioned around not punching down, not trying not to be too overly critical about things that you might not like unless it's an important reason. Recently, PR Week asked they were asking for comments from various different people who worked in PR, and they said, like, would you like to add to it? Has PR got more cutthroat? And there was a reference, I can't remember how they quite phrased it, but it was clear that they were kind of insinuating that LinkedIn had a part to play in the sense that people were critiquing work, or it was kind of more competition or something like that. I personally didn't feel that was the case, but I'm very aware everyone's in their own different LinkedIn bubble. Do you think it's more cutthroat because of LinkedIn? Do you think it's friendlier because of LinkedIn compared to Twitter or anything like that?
No, I don't think it's particularly friendly. I think it is a bit spiky on LinkedIn. I think that's because we feel like we're at school and because we feel like we're at work and we're being watched all the time, people do get spiky on there. And I think there's a lot going on there, right? There's a lot of self-critiquing and a lot of just lack of self-confidence and trying to find things to nitpick. And I do it as well. I do it as well. I think, it is cutthroat, but it's always been cutthroat. I think if you look back at PR and advertising in the 1980s, it was still as cutthroat, if not a heck of a lot worse than it is now. And I don't get the overriding feeling that LinkedIn is offering a kind of bullying branch the same way that it does on maybe X or Instagram, where that sort of language and that kind of behavior is very commonplace. What I would say though is that everyone's LinkedIn is different, and we know that the algorithm is going to be massively different for every type of person on there. My concern about things like LinkedIn personally, and especially LinkedIn, which is, don't forget, owned by Microsoft, is the policing of language on the platform. You can't mention rape or breastfeeding or any of these things that a lot of us in our industry actually work in some ways of helping supporters of that thing, or talking about really important things that are happening in the workplace. So for me, that is a far more important conversation of like not being able to talk about the world around you as it's happening and as it's affecting our workplaces. People dropping media spend on Twitter, for example, because he's doing Nazi salutes. That is a real thing that is happening to my clients on a daily basis that I need to be able to talk about in my public domain and not feel bad about, right? Or have my engagement throttled. So I'm more concerned about that side of stuff in a world where we say free speech is everywhere than whether people are feeling a bit shit about some crap work that they've done, or whether someone's being mean about getting a spelling mistake on an out of home or something like that, because that will always be there. That will always happen. And I think it goes back to this personal brand thing of like, just don't be mean all the time. I think it's okay to critique people, and it's okay to especially critique work that is damaging or dangerous or weird, or like the Sydney Sweeney stuff that came out last week. I think that's fine to go onto LinkedIn and say this is dodgy and this should have been killed before it even got to the copy finesse stage, never mind the outdoor. That they're important conversations to have, and I don't think that should be included as cutthroat. I feel like that is a forum where critique should be encouraged, but it should be in a framework of not really kind of ruining people's lives like it used to be on Twitter. You don't want to start doxing people, right? So there's a fine line there, and I think we're all still trying to find it.
Have you personally ever said something on LinkedIn or a social channel that you've really regretted, though?
Oh, yeah, loads of times. Yeah. There was one, I got cancelled about, I think it was like 15 years ago on Twitter, where I posted this like quite misogynistic image of, I think it was the Kardashians on the front row of a Emmys awards or something. And it said something like, the annotations above them were something like 5 Emmys, an Oscar, something, and then for Kim it said like sex tape or something like that. 15 years ago or longer, I thought that was just a funny little meme. It wasn't a funny meme. It was massively misogynistic. It was, hateful to sex workers. It was everything under the sun that now I would never even think about posting something like that. It's just not in my values or vocabulary to even think like that anymore. So there are always going to be times where you get this stuff wrong, and obviously I had no idea what I was doing at that point. But I think there is a part of me that is like, yeah, it's good that happened to me, but also there are probably thousands of people out there now that do think I'm this misogynistic, hateful maniac, which is sad. And I think a lot of the times you only get one chance on social, and if you mess up and you don't figure out a way to come back from that, or to express some sort of heartfelt apology to the right people at the right times, then you can easily get into trouble. But at the same time, I think cancel culture is nonsense these days. It really is. I think if you look at something like Elon Musk or J.K. Rowling or Glinner or any of the other truly hateful people that haven't accidentally posted a little bit of a misogynistic faux pas 15 years ago, but they're making it their life's work to demonize trans people and to make sure that their lives are being as horrible as possible and actually in danger, or immigrants, or whoever it is. That seems fine. We're in a post-cancel world, I think, now, where J.K. Rowling is able to say the most hateful things in the world and still get a new TV show and work with the biggest actors in the world. So, yeah, I don't believe that it's as bad as everyone says it is. And to whoever was actively offended by that post I made all those years ago, I am genuinely sorry. It was a bit of a shitty thing to do. So please don't cancel me again.
Yeah, let's stop bringing it
After
up.
all these years, a chance to apologise.
Yeah, there we
Lou,
go.
how about you? Because you post a lot. Have you ever regretted anything you've posted on LinkedIn or social?
When PR Week said, do you think the PR industry is cutthroat? And my commentary was kind of like, I was like, I don't think people should be overtly criticising work all the time because, but there are important things you need to critique on. And in my head, I'm like, what have I criticised? I was like, Twitter was a bit wild back in 2020. Like, I might have been a bit bold and been like, I don't like your campaign. I think you could have done it better. Like, yeah, it's a lot of hindsight. And also seeing, I don't know, you see other reactions, you see people being cancelled, or you see, and you kind of learn where I don't know how, I don't feel like I've got anything to say that's going to cancel me, but equally, like, some people feel more like they can be more risky than others, and how risk averse you want to be. This is awful. I might take this out of the podcast because it makes it sound like I inside want to say something terrible, but that's not it.
Desperate scream.
Lou is a vile woman who's got some vile opinions.
No, I don't know quite the point I was trying to make. Thanks, Steve, for asking. No, I don't think so.
I don't know how we are going to. I don't know how we move on from that. Actually, what question?
I'm scared.
I think you should leave this in. This is great. This is great stuff.
Yeah, this is fantastic
I love
content.
It. This is the bit I'll be listening back to.
Just to answer my own question, I've never done anything I've regretted, just in life, but certainly not on social. It's all so well crafted. That's actually untrue. I've said to you before, it's the wrong word. I'm more of like a voyeur on social media. I just like to look at what people are doing and find the content interesting. When I come to post, I don't know. I don't feel like I'm that interesting, even though in person I am. I feel like I'm an engaging guy, but on social, it's just I always just overthink it.
Would you consider yourself an introvert, extrovert, something in between in life?
No, I'm a massive extrovert.
Okay.
Like, I really get all my energy from people, but it's just when I come to, I'm great at writing press releases and like copy for pitches and like email. It's just when it comes to social, I don't know. Maybe it's that school thing you say on LinkedIn. It's like, I'm going to have my work marked here with like little thumbs up and stuff like that. And there's something about it that weirds me out. I don't know.
Well, there might be something in, like, if you're an extrovert, I'm probably a bit of both. I'm probably more of an introvert these days, but I definitely used to be an extrovert. But I wonder whether there's a correlation between people that are normally more introverted that actually find it quite nice to talk on social media and to put stuff out there and to have attention via something. Yeah, that's a little bit more controlled, right? Rather than
not as exhausting.
People, yeah. Whereas most extroverts I know don't fucking care about social media. They're just like,
they're like, I'll just chat to a real person, thanks.
They don't curate it or think about it. They'll just whack up an Instagram story and be like, hey, I'm at a bar. And it's like, yeah, cool, of course you are. You live in bars, you're an extrovert. But I wonder if there's a little correlation there between kind of psychology of social.
That's true.
We've covered a lot. We've covered a lot of subjects. But I do think, as discussed, you've had a really varied career, which I'm sure some people will be incredibly envious about. And if there was anyone out there who wanted to emulate you and wanted to become a creative director and follow in your footsteps, what would be your advice if they were starting out?
There's only so much advice you can give. It all depends. There's that cliche of it's who you know really is a big deal as well. And I think getting in with the right people, and not necessarily networking, but being able to be in their orbit, whether that's on social media or in real life, I think is vital. So be out there and be creating things, especially if you are going into a creative part of the industry as a CD or a senior creative, or whatever it is. Make stuff outside of work as well. I think that's a key one for me. Whether it's script writing in your own spare time, whether it's painting, and I'm not talking about like a side hustle of making candles and drop shipping them on Instagram, and do something for you that proves that to yourself that you're capable and that you like doing what you do. I think the other thing is, like, make mistakes. That it's taken me or maybe I'll rephrase that, own making your mistakes. And be able to move forward, because you are going to make them every single time, probably every brief or every meeting. Like I think you have to have some level of resilience and understanding that you're never going to get everything right all the time. And actually, that might be a 6-month period. It might be a year. It might be 2 years working in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time, or it might be something in your personal life that is unresolved or that you're struggling with. And I think it's okay to continue to make mistakes to get to the thing that you were made for, and that you actually really enjoy doing, and that you find your craft in. I didn't come from a background of kind of design work, for example. I appreciate it. I mean, I can art direct, and I know what I like, and I love working with extremely talented designers and artists. I can't do it myself. I mean, I'm terrible at it. But it's something that I'm hugely passionate in. And I think even just finding the things that you prefer and focusing down on those things, and maybe leaving those other things to the other people, unless you want to pick up a pen and figure it out yourself and maybe not use AI and start drawing, for example, you'd be amazed, that even just learning to draw and the hand-eye coordination and kind of things like scale and perspective that you would never get from a thing like an AI tool or a generative tool can be so helpful, even just for designing a deck. Like these are real basic things that we're taught at GCSE level arts. Fine tune where the direction you want to go. You're the only one that can really dictate that. And I think it's really easy to get swept up in the industry and get swept up in agencies and other big characters and big people and bosses and just be caught up in that ebb and flow of that tide. And then suddenly 5 years later, you hate everything and everything's really hard, or you've had a horrible couple of years, right? Not that I'm speaking from experience or anything, but I think you have to go through some of that, and not all the time. But I think you learn from those mistakes, and you learn from the uncomfortable bits of that process to get to the comfortable bits. So that's a bit wishy-washy and it's a bit therapy language, but that would be my takeaway. The other thing is, I just started calling myself a creative director, and no one asked me any questions about it. So do that at some point.
And that is an incredible way to end the podcast and our conversation.
Shit, if I just lost my job.
Joe, you might have done yourself out of a job there.
No, that was years ago now. I think I know what we do now. I figured it out.
It's been such a pleasure to chat to you. It really has. We've covered a lot of ground. And for our listeners, if they want to hear more from you about your work, like you mentioned you're on X, LinkedIn, can they get in touch with you on there? Can they follow you? Can you give us your handles on air so that they know?
I'm secretly on X, so I'm not publicly on there yet. It's more of a research phase for me at the moment. So I've got a burner account, but for the very select few, I might give you the users. But so DM me on LinkedIn if you ever want to get in touch. That's where I'm most active. So yeah, let's meet on there, and we can bitch about some other agencies' work.
Beautiful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Joe. An absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No probs. Love to see you. Bye.